Welcome to Life Stories, where we share heartfelt tales of love, resilience, and the power of the human spirit. Today's story takes us on an emotional journey of Emma and Ryan, a couple who defied societal expectations and family pressures to build a life filled with love and purpose. From their modest beginnings to the creation of a thriving bakery, their journey is a testament to courage and perseverance. Join us as we explore their struggles, triumphs, and the lessons they learned along the way. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's inspiring tale. On the day of my wedding, I stood in a modest church in Charleston, South Carolina, adjusting the folds of my simple white dress. The room was quiet, save for the faint murmur of guests finding their seats outside. My hands trembled as I gazed into the mirror, feeling the weight of a day I had always dreamed of but now approached with both excitement and trepidation. The dress I wore was nothing extravagant, soft fabric stitched lovingly by my mother's hands. It wasn't silk or lace, but it was perfect in its simplicity, a reflection of the love that had brought me to this moment. Yet, as I stood there, I couldn't ignore the words that had been hurled at me not long ago. "You're just a landscaper's daughter. You'll never belong in our world." Catherine, my soon-to-be mother-in-law, had said those words with a smile that dripped with contempt. Her voice still echoed in my mind, like a thorn stuck deep in my heart. To her, I wasn't a bride marrying the man I loved, I was an interloper, someone beneath her family's carefully curated social image. I imagined her sitting in the pews now, her disapproval radiating through the church like a cold wind. For a moment, I doubted myself. Was I really enough for Ryan? He had always assured me that his love for me was unshakable. But I couldn't silence the doubts stirred by the judgment of others. The weight of the social gap between his world and mine pressed down on me like an anchor. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and forced my lips into a smile as my father, Eric, knocked softly on the door. "Emma, you look beautiful," he said, stepping inside. His strong hands, calloused from years of working the soil, rested gently on my shoulders. His voice was warm, but I could see the worry flickering in his eyes. My father had always been my rock, the person who had sacrificed so much for me, even when the odds weren't in our favor. "Thanks, Dad," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "But I can't stop thinking about what's waiting for us out there." He sighed, his expression softening as he looked at me. "What matters most, Emma, is the love you and Ryan share. You've both chosen each other, and together, you can face anything." I nodded, though the knot in my chest didn't loosen. His words were a comfort, but they didn't erase the fear of what Catherine and her husband, Charles, might do. Their whispers of disdain, the judgmental looks of their family friends, those were things I knew I couldn't escape. Still, I squeezed my father's hand, grateful for his unwavering support. As the minutes ticked by, I tried to focus on Ryan. He had been my sanctuary in the storm, a constant light in a world that often felt too harsh. I remembered the moments when he defended me, standing firm against his parents' attempts to sway him. Charles, with his cold authority, had warned Ryan that marrying me would mean losing his inheritance and being cut off from the family. Catherine had used softer but equally manipulative words, telling Ryan he was throwing away his future for a life of hardship. Yet, through it all, Ryan had remained steadfast. "She's the one I want," he had told them. "No amount of money or influence will ever replace what we have." The sound of the church doors opening snapped me back to the present. My heart began to race as I heard the murmur of the guests settle into a hush. It was almost time. I glanced one last time at my reflection, trying to see the confident bride I wanted to be. Instead, I saw a young woman filled with equal parts love and fear, caught between the joy of a new beginning and the weight of a world that didn't think she belonged. My father offered me his arm, and I took it, leaning on his strength as we walked toward the doors. The aisle stretched before me, lined with familiar faces mixed with strangers who had come to witness this union. At the far end stood Ryan, his eyes locked on mine. In that moment, the doubts and fears began to fade. He was my anchor, the one person who had chosen me without hesitation, even when it meant standing against everything he had known. Each step down the aisle felt like a battle against the judgmental gazes hidden behind polite smiles. I could feel Catherine's icy glare from the front row, her disapproval as sharp as a blade. Charles sat beside her, his face a mask of stoic control, though I knew he was no less critical. But when my eyes met Ryan's, a profound peace settled over me. His love was so clear, so unwavering, that it gave me the strength to take the final steps to where he stood. As I reached him, he took my hands in his, giving them a gentle, reassuring squeeze. "We're in this together," he whispered, his voice steady and sure. In that moment, I knew he was right. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever storms we had to weather, we would face them side by side. And for the first time that day, I allowed myself to believe that our love was enough. The ceremony began with a hush falling over the small church. I stood beside Ryan, our hands intertwined, as the priest welcomed everyone and began the opening words. Yet, even as the ceremony moved forward, I couldn't shake the unease that prickled at the back of my mind. Catherine and Charles sat in the front row, their presence looming larger than life. Catherine's sharp eyes flicked toward me occasionally, her expression carefully neutral but carrying the unmistakable weight of disapproval. Charles's posture was rigid, his face carved from stone as if he were here out of obligation rather than joy. Despite their cold demeanor, I focused on Ryan, drawing strength from the warmth in his eyes. He looked at me as if I were the only person in the room, his love steady and unshakable. It was that love that had brought us here, that had carried us through the months of tension and heartbreak leading up to this moment. But just as I began to feel a sense of calm, a sudden movement in the front row caught my attention. Charles rose from his seat, his commanding presence filling the room like a storm cloud. A wave of murmurs rippled through the congregation, and I felt Ryan's hand tense around mine. The priest paused, looking uncertain as Charles cleared his throat and addressed the room. "Pardon the interruption," Charles said, his voice as cool and sharp as glass. "But as the father of the groom, I feel it is my duty to speak before this ceremony continues." A collective gasp echoed through the church. My heart sank, a cold dread settling in my chest. This was no ordinary objection, this was Charles making his final stand. I could feel Ryan's anger radiating beside me, his grip on my hand tightening as if to shield me from the words that were about to come. Charles turned to face the guests, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "My son, Ryan, is about to marry this woman," he said, gesturing toward me with a deliberate pause that felt like a dagger. "And while I have no intention of insulting anyone here, I must be honest about what this union means for our family." The words that followed cut through me like a blade. Charles spoke of sacrifice, of Ryan throwing away a life of privilege and opportunity to marry someone. In his words, clearly beneath our social standing, he emphasized the cost of this decision, making it clear that Ryan was not only defying his family but also jeopardizing everything they had built. I felt the weight of every gaze in the room turn toward me, some filled with pity, others with judgment. My cheeks burned with shame, and for a moment, I wanted nothing more than to disappear. But then, Ryan released my hand and stepped forward, his posture brimming with quiet defiance. "Enough," he said, his voice trembling with controlled anger. "You've said your piece, Dad. But this isn't your decision to make. It's mine." Charles's cold gaze met Ryan's, the tension between them palpable. "Think carefully, Ryan," he said, his tone measured but menacing. "If you go through with this, you'll lose everything, your inheritance, your position in the family. There will be no coming back." The room fell silent, the weight of Charles's ultimatum hanging heavy in the air. I watched Ryan, my heart pounding. As he stood frozen for a moment, his expression unreadable. Fear flickered in my chest. What if he hesitated? What if this was too much for him to bear? But then Ryan turned to me, his eyes meeting mine with a determination that took my breath away. "I don't need your money or your approval," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I've already made my choice." Charles's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. "You'll regret this," he said coldly, his voice laced with finality. Ryan took my hand again, his touch grounding me in the chaos. "I won't," he replied firmly, "because she's worth everything to me." The silence that followed was deafening, the church filled with the tension of a battle that had reached its peak. For a moment, it felt as if the world had stopped turning. Then, without another word, Charles returned to his seat, his expression unreadable. The ceremony resumed, but the weight of what had just happened lingered in the air. As we exchanged our vows, my voice trembled, but my heart was steady. Looking into Ryan's eyes, I saw the love and strength that had carried us to this moment. Whatever lay ahead, I knew we would face it together. The ceremony concluded amidst a quiet wave of applause. Though the church was filled with whispers and polite smiles, the weight of Charles's interruption lingered like an unspoken shadow. I could still feel the sting of his words and the judgmental gazes of the guests. But Ryan's hand in mine was my anchor, reminding me that his love was louder than any disapproval. As we stepped outside into the warm Charleston sunlight, the air was thick with a mix of emotions. Some guests approached us with smiles, offering congratulations that felt genuine, while others remained at a distance, their glances filled with barely concealed curiosity or disdain. Ryan stood tall beside me, his arm around my waist as if shielding me from the storm. Catherine and Charles exited the church shortly after us, their presence commanding as always. Catherine's lips were pressed into a thin line, her expression as cold as it had been during the ceremony. Charles, on the other hand, didn't look at us. He exchanged a few words with other guests, his movements deliberate and calculated. It was clear he had no intention of acknowledging the man he still considered his son nor the woman he had chosen to marry. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Ryan and I made our way to the modest reception hall. It wasn't the grand event Catherine had envisioned for her son, with towering floral arrangements and chandeliers glittering under crystal ceilings. Instead, it was a simple, intimate gathering, reflecting the life Ryan and I had built together, a life far removed from the lavish world his family occupied. The tables were adorned with handmade decorations crafted by my mother and me, and the scent of freshly baked bread and roasted chicken filled the air. Ryan pulled out a chair for me, his small gestures always so thoughtful. I smiled at him, though my heart was still heavy. As the meal began, my father stood to give a toast. His voice, filled with pride, wavered slightly as he spoke about the journey that had brought us to this moment. He didn't mention the tension or the struggles we had faced, but his words carried an unspoken acknowledgement of all that Ryan and I had endured. "To my daughter, Emma, and to Ryan," he said, raising his glass, "may your love be the foundation for everything you build together. No matter what challenges come your way, may you always find strength in each other." A round of applause followed, and I blinked back tears. My father's words were a reminder of what truly mattered, the love that had carried us through every obstacle. Ryan squeezed my hand under the table, his touch grounding me once again. But as the evening wore on, the reality of what lay ahead began to sink in. I caught glimpses of Catherine and Charles speaking in hushed tones with a few guests, their expressions unreadable but their intentions unmistakable. They weren't just disappointed, they were strategizing. For people like them, control wasn't something they surrendered easily. Later that evening, Ryan and I stole a quiet moment together outside. The sky above was painted with soft hues of orange and pink, the colors of a Charleston sunset that felt almost too beautiful for such a tumultuous day. I leaned against him, his arms wrapped around me, as we watched the sun dip below the horizon. "I'm sorry about everything," he said softly, his voice laced with guilt. "You shouldn't have had to go through that today." I turned to face him, placing a hand on his cheek. "Ryan, you don't have to apologize. None of this is your fault. What matters is that we're here. Together." He nodded, though I could see the turmoil in his eyes. For Ryan, defying his family hadn't been an easy decision. Charles and Catherine had always been a looming presence in his life, their expectations and influence shaping much of who he was. But with me, he had chosen a different path, a path that required courage and sacrifice. As we stood there, I felt a renewed sense of resolve. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Charles had made it clear that Ryan's choice would come with consequences. And I knew his words hadn't been empty. But in Ryan's arms, I found the strength to face whatever came next. Our love, built on a foundation of trust and resilience, was worth every challenge. When we finally returned to the reception, it was clear the night was winding down. Guests were beginning to leave, offering their final congratulations as they made their way out. Catherine and Charles were among the first to go, their departure as cold and formal as their presence had been all day. Catherine gave Ryan a brief glance but said nothing. Charles didn't even look our way. As the door closed behind them, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. They had made their choice, just as Ryan had made his. And while it hurt to see the fracture between him and his family, I knew it was a sacrifice he was willing to make for us. We spent the rest of the night surrounded by those who truly supported us, my father, my mother, and the few friends who had stood by us through it all. The warmth of their presence reminded me that love wasn't about approval or status. It was about choosing each other, every single day. And that was exactly what Ryan and I intended to do. The first few months of married life were a mixture of blissful moments and harsh realities. Ryan and I moved into a modest apartment in Austin, Texas, far removed from the grandeur of his family's estate. It was small, with creaking floors and peeling wallpaper, but it was ours. Despite its imperfections, it became our sanctuary, a place where we could finally breathe and start building a life together. In those early days, we found joy in the simplest things: cooking dinner together in our tiny kitchen, laughing at the burnt edges of our first homemade pizza, and collapsing onto the couch to binge-watch shows after long days of work. There was a lightness to those moments, a reminder that love didn't need wealth or luxury to thrive. But reality soon began to seep in. Ryan's job prospects, which once seemed endless, began to dwindle. Companies that had previously welcomed him with open arms were now turning him away. At first, we chalked it up to bad timing or sheer bad luck. But the truth became clear when Ryan received a call from an old friend. "Your father," his friend Chad had said cautiously over the phone. "He's been making calls, warning people not to hire you, making it clear there'll be consequences if they do." Ryan's face fell as he listened, his expression shifting from disbelief to anger. I stood in the doorway, watching as his shoulders slumped under the weight of the revelation. When he hung up, the room felt heavier, the air thick with unspoken fears. "He's trying to punish me," Ryan said finally, his voice tight with frustration. "He thinks he can control me, even now." I stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "We'll figure it out," I said softly, though the words felt hollow. How could we fight against someone as powerful as Charles? His influence extended far beyond what I had imagined, and it was clear he wouldn't stop until he broke us. The days that followed were a test of our resilience. Ryan spent hours searching for jobs, sending out applications, and attending interviews that seemed to lead nowhere. I watched as the rejection wore on him, the confidence he once carried beginning to fade. Meanwhile, I did what I could to contribute, taking on part-time work at a local cafe. It wasn't much, but it helped keep us afloat. One evening, as we sat together at the small table in our kitchen, I decided to share an idea that had been brewing in my mind. "What if we started selling my cakes?" I asked hesitantly. I know it's not a lot. But people have always loved them. Maybe it's something we could try. Ryan looked at me, his eyes lighting up for the first time in days. That's a great idea, he said, a smile breaking through his exhaustion. Your cakes are amazing. I bet we could make this work. Encouraged by his enthusiasm, I threw myself into baking, turning our tiny kitchen into a whirlwind of flour and sugar. Ryan created a social media page for us, snapping photos of my creations and posting them online with heartfelt captions about the love and care that went into every cake. Our first orders trickled in slowly: friends, neighbors, and a few strangers who had stumbled across our page. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Every delivery Ryan made brought back a spark of joy. He'd return with stories of customers who had raved about the taste or complimented the designs. Hearing their feedback gave me a renewed sense of purpose. A reminder that even in the face of adversity, we could create something beautiful together. One day, fate intervened in a way we hadn't expected. Ryan was delivering a cake to a downtown office building when a man approached him, dressed sharply and carrying an air of curiosity. The man introduced himself as Jerry, the manager of a local cafe chain. He was intrigued by the packaging and asked about the baker behind the cake. Ryan proudly told him about me and our small business. Jerry smiled and proposed an opportunity. I'm looking for something unique for our flagship cafe, he said. How about you bring me a few more samples? And we'll see if this could be a regular partnership. When Ryan came home that day, his excitement was infectious. He burst through the door, his eyes alight with hope as he shared the news. This could be it. Emma, he said, his voice filled with energy I hadn't heard in weeks. This could be our chance to turn things around. As I listened to him, a sense of cautious optimism began to grow in my chest. For the first time in months, it felt like the tide was shifting. The challenges we faced hadn't disappeared. But together, we had found a glimmer of hope. And that was enough to keep us moving forward. The following week, I poured my heart into creating the perfect cakes for Jerry's cafe. Every detail mattered: the texture of the sponge, the balance of flavors, the artistry of the decorations. I wanted these cakes to be more than just desserts. I wanted them to tell a story, to reflect the love and resilience that had brought Ryan and me to this point. Late into the night, I worked in our small kitchen, the sweet aroma of vanilla and chocolate filling the air as Ryan sat nearby, helping where he could. You're amazing. You know that, he said, pausing to watch me as I carefully piped intricate designs onto a cake. I smiled at him, though exhaustion was beginning to set in. We're amazing, I replied. I couldn't do this without you. On the day of the meeting, Ryan carried the cakes into the cafe with the utmost care, their vibrant colors shining through the clear boxes. Jerry greeted him warmly, impressed by the presentation before even taking a bite. Later that afternoon, we received the call we had been hoping for. Jerry's voice was filled with enthusiasm as he praised the quality of the cakes and offered us a weekly delivery contract. I couldn't believe it. 4 months. We had been struggling, barely keeping our heads above water. And now, finally, a door had opened. Ryan and I hugged each other tightly, a mix of relief and excitement washing over us. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the validation. The sense that we were finally moving in the right direction. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Orders poured in, not just from Jerry's cafe but also from new customers who had discovered us through word of mouth. Our tiny kitchen became a flurry of activity, with flour dusting every surface and baking trays stacked high. Ryan handled deliveries with care, his pride in our work evident in every interaction with customers. Amid this busy but fulfilling time, my pregnancy continued to progress. The days were exhausting, my growing belly making it harder to move around the kitchen as quickly as I used to. But the joy of building something together, something that was finally succeeding, kept me going. Every night, Ryan and I would collapse onto the couch, tired but happy, sharing stories from the day and dreaming about what might come next. It was during one of these quiet evenings that we realized we needed to expand. "We can't keep running this from the apartment," Ryan said as he looked around at the chaos of cake boxes and baking supplies that had taken over our home. "We need a proper space." I nodded, knowing he was right. "But how?" I asked, the worry creeping into my voice. "We don't have much saved. And finding a place big enough." "We'll figure it out," he said firmly, taking my hand. "We always do." True to his word, Ryan began searching for affordable spaces in downtown Austin. It wasn't easy, most were far beyond our budget, but he refused to give up. Finally, after weeks of searching, he found it, a small shop nestled next to a popular cafe, with just enough space for a kitchen and a cozy customer area. It wasn't glamorous, but it was perfect for us. When I first walked into the empty space, I could already picture what it could become. "This is it," I said, turning to Ryan with a smile. "This is where we'll build our dream." We signed the lease and dove headfirst into renovations. It was hard work, especially with my pregnancy making every task more physically demanding. But Ryan was by my side every step of the way. He painted walls, assembled shelves, and stayed up late sketching ideas for the shop's layout. One afternoon, as I was carefully painting a corner of the shop, I felt the baby move, a fluttering sensation that made me pause. Placing my hand on my belly, I smiled. "I think the baby's excited about the new shop," I said to Ryan, who rushed over with wide eyes. He placed his hand next to mine, his face lighting up as he felt the tiny movements. "Our little pastry chef," he joked, his voice filled with warmth. In those moments, surrounded by paint cans and sawdust, I realized something profound. This wasn't just a bakery we were building. It was a home, a place filled with love, dreams, and the promise of a brighter future. As the morning sunlight streamed through the windows of our newly opened bakery, Golden Bakes, I stood behind the counter with Ryan by my side and our daughter, Lily, nestled in her crib nearby. The aroma of freshly baked cakes filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of customers' chatter. Looking around at the bustling shop, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. Our journey had been anything but easy, filled with challenges and sacrifices. But it had brought us to this moment, a life built on love, resilience, and unwavering belief in one another. Ryan squeezed my hand, his smile reflecting the peace we had both fought so hard to achieve. As Lily let out a soft giggle, I realized that we hadn't just built a bakery, we had built a future. Thank you for following our journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales.